Thank you very much, and thank you to Cato for inviting us here and giving us the opportunity to be here. It's really an honor for all of us to be here. And it's been an honor, frankly, to work on the Little Pink House. I'm from New London. I was born there, and I was raised in towns right around New London. And I had watched this story unfold. Like most of us who live in or around New London, it was in our papers every day for roughly 7 years. And as this was going on, I was writing other books and covering other stories. And in the back of my mind, I kept hoping that no one else would write this book before I got to it, because to me it was just such a compelling story that it needed to be a book. And when the decks finally cleared for me, it was around Thanksgiving of 2005. And unlike most journalists in the country who may have wanted to write this book, I could literally get in my car and drive 5 minutes and be in the Fort Trumbull neighborhood where this whole thing happened. And I knocked on the Pink House door. I didn't know Suzette at the time. And usually, as a journalist, when I'm going to approach somebody who I really want to do an interview with me, I prepare quite a bit. I research them, I prepare my approach, and because oftentimes if you mess it up, you may lose the opportunity to interview them. And so I had this terrific pitch for Suzette, and I got to the door and I was all ready to go, and she opened the door and I said, "Hi, I'm Jeff Benedict and I'm an investigative journalist, and I'd like to," and she interrupted me right there and she said, "I know who you are. What took you so long?" And so started our relationship, and she invited me into this Pink House that I had seen so often on the news and in the paper. And for the next 3 hours, we sat at her kitchen table, and I asked her invasive, probing questions, and I was trying to get a sense of how much she would tell me, how truthful she would be, how open she would be, whether she would work for a lead vehicle to tell the story. And I was convinced after 3 hours that she would, and she told me that she would cooperate, and we left the house, and she walked me through the neighborhood. And at that time, there were still some houses there. The Supreme Court had handed down the ruling, but the ruling hadn't been executed yet. And so there were still, all the holdouts from the case were still there. And we walked it, and by the time I got back to my car, in my mind, I knew what the title of this book would be, Little Pink House. It was very clear to me, and usually titles are one of the hardest things in a book to figure out. I started interviewing people and working my way through this story. And the central question that was intriguing to me, I mean, everybody knows the outcome. We know the end. But what I wanted to know was, what was the beginning? How did this thing start? And whose idea was this in the first place to take homes, and why? And that was actually a really hard question to get to the bottom of, because there were three central parties that wanted to take this neighborhood. There was the state of Connecticut, who had a governor at the time, John Rowland, who was aggressively trying to do urban renewal plans in waterfront cities in Connecticut. Most of those cities are democratically controlled. He's a popular Republican governor, and he's getting into these democratic cities. And how is he doing this without the cooperation of these democratic governments? That's one issue. Number two is there's a global pharmaceutical giant, Pfizer, that is building a headquarters next door to Suzette's neighborhood. They're the second party. And then third is the New London Development Corporation. They're the ones who actually hire the people who use the bulldozers to plow the houses down. And those three parties come together, and who was first? I mean, who started this all? And what I discovered was that the governor wanted to go into New London, but he didn't know how to get in. And so he went looking for someone who could open the city up to him and go around the local government. And so he used a lobbyist, a guy with a great Rolodex who was a Democrat, but who would be happy to, for money, use his connections to help the governor get into the city. And the governor gets into the city, and then the question is, okay, how do we develop here? Well, you know what? There's a vehicle we used to have called the New London Development Corporation. It's not a public organization in the sense that we don't elect these people, but we appoint them. We could reactivate that organization and give them the power to do the development program that you want to do. And so, okay, well, who's going to lead it? Well, they go over to Connecticut College and they find this flamboyant, charismatic woman named Claire Gaudiani, who's a great fundraiser. She's got power and chutzpah, and we'll put her in charge of it because she can get things done. We'll give her the reins and let her run. And okay, so she comes on board. So now you got the state, you got the New London Development Corporation, but how are we going to do a big development in a city, this depressed area of New London? And she had the bright idea, and I think it was a bright idea. We need to get a Fortune 500 company to come in first, because if they say yes to New London, then that's like building a mall and starting with an anchor store like Macy's. Then everybody else will come. So, well, who are we going to get? Well, let's get Pfizer, because they have a facility across the river in Groton, and word is they're trying to expand. They need land. And it turned out to be true. So Claire picked up the phone, because who sits on the board of directors at Connecticut College where she's the president? The president of Pfizer. And so she calls him at home. I'd like to talk to you about something. And they have a one-on-one dialogue that starts. And she says, would you think about New London? No way. We're not going to New London. We've already got our sites. In fact, we're down to the last two. So it's too late to even think about New London. But she works them, and she lobbies them, and she brings them down there, and they finally make this great proposal with the governor's consent, which is we have 24 acres on the waterfront. It's environmentally toxic, but the state will clean it at their cost, and they'll give you the whole 24 acres, which are right on Long Island Sound, for $1. All you have to do is agree to build there. And Pfizer looks at that and says, well, that's not bad, but there's a few more things we'd like. And they're not really suggestions, they're requirements. And here are the things we need in order to do this. And well, the important one for this story is, because there was a bunch of them, the important one is we would like the 90 acres around this site to be cleared, razed, just erased. Get the eraser out and take it off the map. And we want to build new things there. Well, we don't want to build them, we want you to build them. And what we'd like there is we'd like a 5-star hotel. We'd like a health club and spa. We'd like some biomedical research facilities. We'd like some office space, and we'd like some upscale housing. And when you think about it from Pfizer's perspective, that makes sense. I mean, if you're going to build your global research and development headquarters there, you kind of like to have a neighborhood around you that you like and that complements what you're doing. I understand that. So the question is, if you're the governor, are you going to say yes to that? Are you going to guarantee that you can deliver that? Well, the governors did say yes. And Pfizer said yes and signed, and off we go. And that works great for people who want to sell their land that live in that 90 acres, and some people did. Most of those people were people who owned businesses that hadn't done anything in a long time, because it was industrial properties there and business zones, but there was also a neighborhood that was residential, and the neighborhood had been there over 100 years, settled by Italian immigrants, people whose father's father built those houses and had lived there, and people who were born there, people who wanted to die there. It was a great neighborhood, it wasn't dilapidated, and they didn't want to leave. But there was only one person in that neighborhood that actually had the courage to say that to someone's face, and that was Suzette. Because a lot of the people were elderly, and they use a cane to get around, and they're too shaky to even sign their name on a contract. And they really weren't equipped to fight the governor, a pharmaceutical, and a development corporation with bulldozers ready to plow houses down. And Suzette rallied this neighborhood, and as I started to learn this story, I thought, this is terrific. Because they did all the things they teach you. I was a politics student, and when I went to school, I mean, they taught us how you use the democratic process. You write letters to the editor, you go to the city council, and you speak in hearings, you get petitions, and you get ready to sign them. Well, you know what? They did all that stuff. It didn't matter. None of that mattered, because the fix was in. This was going to happen no matter what the people said. No matter what, it was happening. And it did happen. They started knocking houses down. And as I reported this story, I thought, this is remarkable, because we're talking about 90 acres, and the fact is that these homeowners, they actually possessed about less than 3 acres of the 90 acres in question. And I couldn't help but think from a business standpoint. I remember in law school when we took, these business law classes, and they talked about negotiation and compromise and efficiency and everything else. I'm thinking, wait a second here. The city has $100 million of the state's money. Actually, it was some of my money, because I'm a taxpayer in Connecticut. So that's our money that they've sunk into this thing. Pfizer's got all this money into this thing. The city's got money into this thing. And they want to build all this stuff, and 87.3 acres isn't enough? They need the other 2.3. And if they can't get the 2.3, then we're going to have a fight all the way to the Supreme Court that takes 7 years?